I jokingly tell people I applied out to 99 places and got 100 rejections because one place sent it twice. And it's not a false statement. And I'm sure you've heard the same story where folks like, I get nothing but rejections. So the advice and thing I'll say to people is one, don't give up and just keep being persistent because you will find the place that wants to take you and give you your chance to break in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Simply Offensive. Today I'm joined by my good friend Andrew Crotty, aka the GingerHacker. So we met through the cybersecurity community. I guess through Simply Cyber is how we met, and got to meet in person. Was at the Noob Village last year at DEF CON for the first time in person. So welcome to the show.
Hey, so glad to be on and very excited to get to chat. So yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be on your show. It's one of the things for folks that are in content creation. Collaboration is one of the best things you can do for your show because you can help each other out. And so it's really a great way to grow. And one of the top recommendations I see, and the nice thing about collaboration is collaboration should be free. In our case, it is. No one's had to pay to be on a podcast.
Yeah, I think one thing we'll be excited to talk about too is like getting that brand, that self-branding, and kind of getting to share stories or kind of having to do talks, call for papers. You get to kind of show the type of person you are. And also just like a lot of us in this industry and within, I'd say, the content community too, we're very passionate about cybersecurity. We're getting to kind of share those stories and get to hear other people's side of how they got started. It's just a lot of fun to hear and talk about. So yeah.
Yeah, before we get too far into things, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing your origin story, your background, how you got started.
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. My name's Andrew Crotty, also known as GingerHacker. And yeah, I have quite the odd story. I'll kind of keep it to a bluff, but was in law enforcement for about 8 years with the city of Phoenix. Been in the military for going on 17 and decided to make the career change via leveraging the military to actually get into cybersecurity. So, I joined the military as a military police officer, did that for about 10 years, made a transition about 4 years ago into threat intelligence. So CTI was attached to a cyber protection team and kind of very quickly figured out I really enjoyed cybersecurity. So I did what any kind of person does trying to break into cyber, got my security plus, went back to school for my master's in cybersecurity. And then thanks to hard work, networking, got my first role with the state of Arizona Department of Homeland Security in cybersecurity. Worked there for about 9 years, moved all the way up to engineer, pivoted over to Wells Fargo for the fintech sector. During my time at Wells Fargo, I continued my military career and decided to become a warrant officer in the military for a cyber warfare technician, or a 170 Alpha. That is ideally the best way to describe it is doing incident response, I'd say, for the DoD. So we go around, we make sure that all those bad threat actors are outside the DoD's web space. And then just the last year and a half, I left Wells Fargo, or the fintech sector, and I'm working back on the contracting side for DHS. And my current role is a senior cyber threat intelligence analyst working for DHS with Leidos. And I can happily say that since I made that change into cyber, I am very happy. It's a great career, and I'm continuously learning. And that's just a little bit about me.
So if you don't mind explaining for our audience that maybe they haven't worked in it about cyber threat intelligence.
Yeah, so cyber threat intelligence. So first off, when I got to initially get into cyber threat intelligence with the military, the way that I was leveraging it with them is so we'd go into incident response or these projects or missions where there was maybe a possible compromise, there was maybe a certain area or geolocation we were traveling to, and we were very much obviously cyber threat oriented. So it's like, hey, what adversaries would be targeting this location? What maybe threat actors would want to get this information or ransomware or steal this information to sell it to the highest bidder? So being inside threat intelligence, what I would pretty much do is we do these write-ups or kind of build-ups of the areas we were going to, what maybe threat actors would specifically target that maybe specific technical niche or entity we're working with. And then that way we had to have like a top 5 or our top talkers of, okay, well, this area is really interested to Russia, so we believe that our top 5 maybe threats would be Russian threat actors. Or you know what? We're going to Africa. this specific area is really important to the Chinese right now. So we think maybe that there's going to be more Chinese nation threat actors that would be more involved or wanting to be involved in the information of gathering all this information. And as my team would go and conduct their hunts or find maybe indicators of compromise or any type of other artifacts from an event or some type of investigation, it would then get kicked off to our intelligence cell where myself and a small team of individuals would kind of comb through a bunch of open source tools and other tools that we had access to. And we try to correlate those activities or those artifacts with those malicious threat actors. Now, another cool kind of part with being in cyber threat intelligence is we're constantly kind of just doing research. So obviously, in the last 6 months, there's been a bunch of new 0 days that have popped, new CVEs, new TTPs that threat actors are actually using and conducting to conduct crimes, conduct ransomware. And what we try to do is we try to predict or kind of provide that information to our organizations for them to look into our own infrastructure saying, hey, here's an event that's happening right now. Or, hey, we've caught tailwinds of maybe through the dark web, other resources that we can find of like, hey, there's a possible activity that's about to happen. Are we secure and should we have to worry about this? So an example I like to give people is like a simple, let's say there's a new Linux vulnerability that can bypass you directly to root, which oddly enough there is. Well, maybe my organization is solely Windows and we have no Linux systems. If that came out and my management was concerned about it, they might say, wait a minute, we have this huge Linux vulnerability. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Sometimes the threat team and other parts of the cyber team can say, hey, you know what? We are not at risk. We don't have any of those type of infrastructure systems or servers that would affect us if they were trying to exploit that on our systems. And that's kind of a nitty-gritty kind of maybe a very high, low level of what CTI does.
So one of the things too is, I've heard familiar with, CTI. I've heard several people that work in that area. So someone that wants to get into CTI, what would you recommend for them learning wise? How would they learn a role like CTI?
Yeah. So first thing is definitely have to be curious. So when I got to kind of get into this role of doing cyber threat intelligence, I came from a background of law enforcement. Before I even kind of get into the full deep ends of my positions now where I was at the federal level. So I oddly enough related to it kind of like detective work. Being a detective or working as a police officer, you're having to write reports, you're having to do these investigations of why a crime happened. And when I got into cybersecurity, at least for my first role with the military as a cyber threat intelligence analyst, it was ideally conducting an investigation. Hey, we think this crime or something's going on or this malicious activity is going on. I had to leverage all my research skills to kind of find reporting, do my own type of investigations. And then I had to write reports on, hey, why is this important? Or why should my organization or should my cyber unit care about this? So very much having to do, if you're not interested in conducting or writing assessments, may not be the job for you, but having to kind of write out the 5 W's of who, what, when, why, where this is going to happen, who's it going to affect, remediation steps are pretty vital. The way that I would tell people to really maybe get interested or jumped into this is I initially started my position as a SOC analyst. So with the state of Arizona, getting into my actual first role into cybersecurity outside the military. So leveraging and being inside of a SOC, seeing the detections coming in, working cases, working EDRs, SIMs, doing my own kind of threat hunting and analysis when certain things came in, looking up child processes, command line, understanding how and why those things work, very much put me on a nice level playing field when I actually had to do my interview for the CTI role on breaking down my alert process, breaking down how I conduct my investigations, and also just breaking down how I would research something. There's going to be a lot of times, and you can almost argue this for any role, you're going to come across certain questions or certain maybe command lines or certain maybe things that occur that you don't know what's going on. And rather than going directly to a tier 2 or pinging your manager, having that self drive to go in to actually do the best investigation you can or conduct as deep of a thorough investigation as you can solo is one thing that makes a lot of threat intel analysts very vital. So leveraging my team, knowing to ask the right questions, and kind of just with my time as being a SOC analyst for the past almost several years, you get to learn a lot of those strong fundamental skills that you and I also talked on my channel on having to understand what a network is, understanding how traffic navigates, knowing your own internal network for your organization, knowing what teams you can reach out to, what normal baselines look like. Sounds like a lot, and it kind of somewhat is. But those would be, I say, are some amazing ways or really strong foundational skills where if you're looking to get into CTI, creating maybe a daily blog of cool threat events that are occurring on a weekly or a monthly basis. I'm not saying you have to do something every day, but even doing that and creating your own research or analysis would be a huge way to kind of stand out, I would say, if you're trying to get into the cyber threat intelligence world.
So it's kind of interesting that there seems to be some similarities between that and incident response. So if you can kind of explain kind of the differences between the two, and does anyone ever move from IR to CTI?
Yeah. So, and just like you said, there are, I'd say, some similarities. And I'd say most of the time, and I can talk to this at least at the bank and all three roles I've had, all the teams are very well close knit and kind of go very close hand in hand. So, cause with instant response, so those are your, hey, something is happening. We need to go in right now and kind of do some quick kind of analysis, DFIR, into figuring out how and why this event occurred. Your IR team can sometimes go first or can also be middle, can also go last, depending on where CTI works in. So we'll use the example of maybe IR is working something first. So if IR is working something where they're hands-on keys, they're remoting into systems, they're pulling out artifacts, they're pulling out these maybe a C2 or some IP address that they kind of find. Well, they're still doing that triage right now, but then they'd kick an RFI to our team saying, we're working this immediate threat hunt response. We found these IOCs. Here's some URLs, some hashes, some IP addresses. Can you do some research for us and see if these are correlated to any current ransomware attacks, prior TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures that other bad actors or threat profiles have used? That would then come to our CTI team. We'd take those, we'd run them through the tools we have. We go do some open source research on them as well. And we would see if we could correlate those to any current attacks or events happening. Because luckily within the cybersecurity world, organizations do like to share sometimes IOCs or events that have happened. So we'll use Quackbot example, Quackbot malware. So very, very familiar. It's been around for, I'd say, a few years now. So most of the IOCs you can find for that have been shared on Mist, have been shared on all these other different kind of open source malware sharing platforms. Where maybe if there's a different one I haven't seen before, but that's what it's actually correlating to, I can share that within the cyber threat community. Now, reverse that. Let's say cyber threat intelligence is working something where we're doing some research, and all of a sudden, as we're searching our systems because we find a brand new malware or maybe an IP address that just came across one of our tooling. And all of a sudden, when we do our scans or 30, 60, 90-day lookbacks, I see that, hey, that IP address touched my network 2 weeks ago. Well, that's concerning. That might now be the sense of where the CTI team reaches out to our incident response team saying, hey, we found this IP address doing some research 2 weeks ago. It touched our network and was on Janet Jill's laptop that works in finance. That's kind of a big deal because obviously finance might work with the payrolls. They might handle financing, could do also third-party billing. We don't now know, at least on the CTI side yet, because that's not initially our role of like, hey, well, let's remote in and see if her laptop is now beaking out somebody, causing any type of a latency. Did they install something on there? That's where the CTI team can reach out to IR, your incident response, and saying, hey, we want to spin you guys up. Here's all the information we found. Here's the IOC. Here's the username. Here's the host name. Can you now dive in and kind of see what's going on within that host? So yeah, very much incident response and CTI can very much go hand in hand across both organizations and even talking outside the organizations.
Very interesting. And so are there any courses out there or any classes, any training that you think would be good for anyone wanting to learn CTI?
So I would say there's some I found like basic off like Udemy and some other, I think like CyberArk and Pluralsight, where I found some awesome just basic like those industry courses. I myself, other than the military, I've been able to go to some what's called Foundry courses, which are open source cyber threat intelligence courses that the Army teaches our all source analysts to go into. Unfortunately, they're not open to the public sector. There's obviously a few of the SANS classes, obviously very expensive, but if your organizations are willing to pay for, there's the OSINT courses that they offer. But I'd almost argue that being an open source analyst or getting into CTI, some of the other courses that I'd actually recommend that are good to have in this field are kind of some of the probably generic ones you're going to hear across the belt. So your Security Plus, OSCP, CYSA, TryHackMe's SA1, their pen test one, because the biggest thing with CTI really is one, knowing how to kind of research and do that investigation piece of it, but also just as we mentioned before, having strong fundamentals. If I don't know how networking traverse through my network and understand DNS or the OSI models, or if I don't understand how maybe red teamers would conduct certain actions on objective following like the cyber kill chain or the MITRE attack framework in those 14 verticals. Ideally, it can be a little bit more harder to understand the technical ease of it. But I'd say just being curious and knowing how to understand and write out a thorough report of like those 5 W's is really important, because let's say you find something that's relatively valuable across the net while you're doing your investigations. If it's too difficult to transcribe that in a clear and concise methodology to your C-suite, to your users, it's hard to then get that out. Or if I just send someone a link saying, hey, read this over, this is important. If they don't understand what they're reading, they may not know how to action the thing I'm actually looking for them to look at. If there's something on that link that says, hey, look, crackbot malware, this IOC or IP address is bad, and here are all these indicators. If I send that to maybe someone that's new on the team that's not familiar with those specific terminologies, or maybe doesn't know exactly how they need to action that or where to send this to next, the importance of a clear report says, hey, here's what we're finding, here's why it's bad, here's the next remediations of what we think needs to happen. It paints a clear and concise kind of pathway that we can then kind of allow our organization to get into. Yeah, to be honest, like the CTI certification path route, I'm not going to say there's not many. I just can't think of any else on the top of my head that I've drastically looked at to kind of go after. It's all mostly been going through being a security analyst and working inside SOCs, understanding terminologies, going through all my fundamentals, and then kind of following those through to kind of get to where I am today.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things because there's just some of those areas of cybersecurity out there that you just don't commonly hear of a lot of stuff. I mean, I know like even for digital forensics, because my wife actually works in digital forensics, you don't hear, SANS has some stuff, and then I know of one other certification, but you don't hear a lot about it. Some of the fundamental stuff like the CYSA, Sec Plus, some of the fundamental type stuff you hear a lot of, but you just don't really, I don't know, I really don't hear much CTI or digital forensics.
Yeah, and I mean,
content.
The one thing I tell people also understand though too is like, so MITRE attack, I think has a CTI. I don't know if it's like a certification, but they have like a small course. That's one good reference I'd leverage folks to look into. EC Council also actually does have their CTIA, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst program. That's I've heard good things about it, and I think I've gone through the majority of the basic training for it, and I liked it. It kind of goes through like kind of what we talked about, the methodologies, what are IOCs. I think CTI is one of those kind of, I personally think CTI it's a great feeder job for those that have worked IT help desk, that jumped into the SOC, or maybe the VAT team, vulnerability assessment team, that kind of understand and know how their organization sits and lays out. And then understanding that security piece of it, of kind of like the how and why these events that are occurring or these threats that are populating can affect your organization. I think Mandiant also has a CTI training certification as well. And those are like the top 3 that kind of come to my mind just on kind of a quick ponder.
So what are some typical progressions for someone, say like they've been a CTI for a while and they're wanting to move to something else? What are some typical progressions of jobs that they may pursue after working at CTI?
No, this one's a good question. And I mean, this is also going to kind of depend on, I'd say, where you're at and where you want to go to in your career. So I think my next progression is going to be, I'd like to think management, because I say some CTI positions can be a more senior-esque, depending on the organization you're with. And you're going to have a relatively large understanding of your environment, your network. So, I mean, it could be that aspect if you decide you now want to start managing people, going down that C-suite path. I've also known, and several of my friends as well, that have been through SOC analysts, they got to CTI, they then pivot over to their IR team to go into incident response. They've also gotten into the pen testing route. And the cool thing kind of with CTI is it's kind of a choose your own adventure. there's very much a piece of this organization and kind of role where you can still stay technical and dive into those next roles that are like a more technical-esque role. There's also the side of it where since we're writing up so many reports and doing so much research, those I've seen folks go to CISO positions because of the wide knowledge you get to learn and kind of absorb in this kind of field is massive. You're constantly researching, you're constantly knowing what's the newest and latest, greatest threat, what are APTs doing, and to an organization, whether you're big or small, you want to know how big of a target you are to these threat actors that are dropping ransomware and requesting thousands, if not millions of dollars of crypto onto your organization. And then I've also seen the C-suite path where they want to go into management. And then I've also seen it where they want to stay at CTI. It's a fun role. They kind of get to do the best of both worlds where they get to still be involved in IR threat response. They still get to do a bunch of research and learning, and it can kind of be a happy medium. So, I mean, I would say that would be a really self-choice of where you see yourself going within your path in your career.
Very cool. So it'd be a missed opportunity if we don't discuss it. So you got a podcast and a YouTube channel. So what got you interested in doing content creation?
Yeah. Funny enough, when I was breaking into cyber, I was lucky enough to have great mentorship through the military. This is not a plug for the military, but I always talk about it a lot because I got to where I am, I'd say very much thankful to it. But when I realized that I had good mentors that I pulled from the military, I kind of realized that sometimes folks have a hard time finding mentorship. And not everyone in the cyber world is a chatty Cathy. They're not an extroverted person. So I decided to kind of make a YouTube channel that kind of mapped my journey of breaking into cyber. Thus, my running series I have called Breaking into Cyber. And when I was going through my warrant officer course, I actually did a series where every single week when I was there for the 9 months, I did I did a video every week, just kind of doing a high level of, hey, what did I go over? What is my next steps of like, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's a bunch of open source resource tools you should look into going to this course. And I had such a good response on it. And like a lot of folks are like, hey, I actually joined the military because I saw your video when I was thinking about going 170 alpha. And not to punch at the military here, but sometimes the recruiting videos you see are just all the cool stuff. And it's like, oh, you want to be an MP? You're going to kick in doors and drive in Humvees, and it's so much fun. But for the technical side of things, I kind of wanted to kind of just show folks like, hey, look, this is really fun. I'm really enjoying it. And here's the things I've learned. So then here came my series idea when I got back from that was saying, hey, I'm still relatively new in my career. I'm going to start talking to folks, everyone from juniors and seniors in college to tier 1 help desk to engineers, vulnerability assessment analysts, directors, CISOs, managers, folks in the industry, different streamers, Jerry, John Hammond, Jason Dion, folks that have been doing this for a hot minute. And I'm just going to ask them like, hey, what advice would you give someone trying to break in? Because when I know, when we go to these conferences, we have all these folks trying to do the career change, young students that are really trying to get their foot in the door and get those first roles. And the industry is constantly changing. I can't tell you the same thing I did about 8 years ago would work today right now trying to break in. So the way I see it is if I keep doing this series where I get to keep talking to folks in the industry that they just broke in or they've still been in or they're hiring managers, and they get to give that insight of how they would break into cyber or what looks good on a resume or things that they look for on a resume that makes it stand out as being the best candidate. That's a way I can kind of get back to do the one-to-many methodology with YouTube. It creates a huge platform where when someone asks me how do I break into cyber, I can say, hey, well, I have a whole series where I talk to folks in the industry that I can tell you my advice right now, or you can go listen to the hundreds of videos I'm making every year. And just as I do it monthly, you're going to hear someone else's idea. And the concept of that is if you hear it from the right person, that's what's really going to click and say, you know what, that's how I'm going to do it. That's how I plan to do it. And that's the YouTube piece of it. The nonprofit piece of it with the GingerHacker initiative is last year when you met me with Josh Mason out in New Village, I had such a good time in getting to work with the community. I wanted to find a way to give back. So I, oddly enough, was reaching out to a ton of different nonprofit organizations, and I didn't hear anything back. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to make my own nonprofit. Thus, the GingerHacker initiative was born. And the whole mission behind it is exactly kind of like the YouTube channel. It's just to help folks break into cyber. We've partnered with the majority of the certification vendors in the industry. And and I know that, yes, certifications aren't the key golden ticket to get into an organization. But for a lot of students and folks trying to break in, it's expensive. Cybersecurity certifications are not cheap. Even Security Plus is around $450, which I think they're just about to do a price update, which I haven't seen the new prices. If I can be an organization that helps provide those scholarships in that community to help folks break in, network, do resume exchanges, ask career advice and feedback, and if we have the ability and means to help you get your first certification and help you get your Security Plus, and that's what gets you in the door to your first role in cybersecurity. I mean, at some point, Phil, you want to retire, I want to retire, the John Hammonds and the Network Chucks want to retire. And if we're not leveling up our replacements, we either have to sit longer in our roles or those roles will sit dormant until someone that meets the skills can fit into that next role. And that's kind of that's the vision and the vision why I kind of made my YouTube and why I made the nonprofit was to really fully just give back.
That's great. And I think it's important too that you mentioned speaking with people that are kind of newer in the industry because just things have changed so much, since you first got in. Same thing, something I run into. And that's one of the reasons on my podcast, especially the Phillip Wylie show, I bring on folks that are fairly new. And I've had some people that hadn't even started their first job sharing what they've been doing. Because when you have someone on like a Dave Kennedy, you could see is almost like the Michael Jordan equivalent in cybersecurity. People think I can never be like that. But if you get someone that's been in a year or two, had some good success, then sometimes I think it may encourage people more because they think I can do that, opposed to someone that's just such a legend in the field and they've been doing it for so long.
I tell people, like, when I was breaking in from law enforcement, like the real OG story, it was I worked my full day at my job as a cop. I'd come home at 5, I'd had dinner with the family, and then from 7 to 11, it was homework, it was essays, it was studying for certifications, rinse, wash, repeat, sometimes through the weekends, because I was very dedicated to get this new career to change and make it happen. But it doesn't happen overnight. Tell people that for me to make my full story of breaking into cyber, it took about a year. And that's juggling full-time job, family and kids. Being a cop, I had to go to court. I had to work task forces. I was on call. It wasn't fun in a sense. It's fun now because I'm in the industry. But yeah, the short answer, the stick is it's a lot of hard work. And that's one thing where I think some people think that when they get done with school and they get their certifications, their hands go out like, okay, where's my 6-figure job? And it's not that easy. It's still having to find the right fit for the right company, showing that you have the right skills or enough skills to get into that perfect role. And it's you competing with all these other individuals. Like, unfortunately, like Cisco just had a layoff, Meta just did an 8,000 person layoff. So you're competing against all these other rock star applicants that you're also a rock star with. And now you're really having to fight to be that best person. So yeah, I let people know that when I was getting that first role, I didn't keep track of it. And I know some people do. I probably applied out to 80, 90 positions. I was actually in Kuwait deployed when I was doing interviews. I was waking up at 1 a.m. in Kuwait to do 7 a.m., 8 a.m. interviews stateside, trying to find that next role so that when I got back from my deployment, rather than staying with law enforcement, I could try to get that next role into cyber. And a lot of rejection letters, man. I jokingly tell people I applied out to 99 places and got 100 rejections because one place sent it twice. And it's not a false statement. And I'm sure you've heard the same story where folks like, I get nothing but rejections. So the advice and thing I'll say to people is, one, don't give up and just keep being persistent, because you will find the place that wants to take you and give you your chance to break in.
Great advice. So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share before we end?
I would say that, as I mentioned before, this is the role you want to fit into. If you're not sure yet, make a list of your top 3 titles that if you wanted to break in, what would be the 3 job titles you want to have, whether that's a junior pen tester, a SOC analyst, IT help desk. And for a week at a time, take one of those roles and research what that role consists of, the certifications, look up job requirements, and see if those make kind of fit your fancy. On that 4th week, total up those things and see what's your best fit. And that's how you should be trying to either translate your resume to the training you're getting into. That's what you should really focus on. I know a lot of folks can kind of get scatterbrained and kind of go down a lot of different rabbit holes trying to break in with having 10 screens open, doing a practice test on their phone, listening to an audiobook. So I just try to tell people to focus on that one role and to focus on that.
Very good. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today. And for the listeners, we'll be sharing Andrew's social media and the link to his YouTube channel so you can find him and check out his great content.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode. And make sure to subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, take care.